So welcome to another wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander, and today I'm here on my lonesome. So we're taking a look at an older game from GMT Games. It is Unhappy King Charles. So I think this came out 2008, I believe. Is this particular printing? Now I've said that out loud, I'm not confident anymore. But I think it was around that time. I'm on my own today because I played this with a friend who was in town. Grant was supposed to be able to join us, but he had some late work meetings that came up, so we were going to play some 3-player games, but we ended up just the two of us playing Unhappy King Charles. It's been sat on my shelf probably 2 years or so, and, you know, I've played maybe one, maybe two other English Civil War games, maybe. It's two. No, it is two. And so, you know, this one is kind of... It's one of the big dogs of, like, you play the whole English Civil War kind of a thing. It's been around for a while. And so it was something that I've always wanted to play, and I've had it on my shelf, and we just had an opportunity, and I'm like, yes, absolutely, let's do this. So, what is Unhappy King Charles? Well, in today's day and age, Unhappy King Charles is an English Civil War version of Washington's War. And the story is a little bit more history than that, because I believe it started out, Mark Herman designed We the People, and then that system was then used for Unhappy King Charles, and then Mark revisited We the People and turned it into Washington's War. So this isn't really based off of Washington's War, nor is Washington's War based off of this. They're both kind of derived from We the People. So, I believe. So, and, you know, through the order in which these were released, you can kind of see that. So, this is a 2-player, card-driven game on English Civil War. The map uses point-to-point movement, and the map, as a lot of English Civil War games are, is divided up into regions. So you've got, like, the South, which is color-coded, the Midlands, you've got the East and East Anglia, and then you've got Wales and the West and the marshes over there. And then you've got the north of England as well. And then, you know, going up into Scotland. So, where you can rally, where you can raise certain troops is limited to where they were historically from. Certain leaders are from certain areas and, you know, didn't leave those areas, so you're limited to where they can kind of campaign, so to speak. One of the cool aspects of this is that there's people called local notables, where they weren't like generals or anything like that. They don't go and command armies, but they're more static, and they can influence a kind of small area within the region they're in as well. And some of those later in the game can get converted into generals, but you've got your armies marching around with generals, and then you've got these other more static, you know, civic leaders and rabble-rouser type people, it's very interesting to have that as well. So there's kind of 2 layers to this game. One is that it's something of a war game. You have military units with military strength in them, and you'll have generals that command them, and they're going to be marching around the board, either sieging cities or attacking other field armies, and you're doing that to weaken the opponent's forces and to take vital spaces. But the other part of this, again, similar to Washington's War, is that there is this political influence that's going on as well. So the Royalists are trying to put out these blue markers in all of these spaces. You know, it's kind of like hearts and minds of the people, so to speak. And then the parliamentarian players trying to put out these orange ones. And so you're marching guys around doing fighting, but you're doing that really in the aim of flipping these counters. You're trying to get the people on your side. That's ultimately how victory is most often going to be decided. You can win as the parliamentarians by defeating King Charles in a field battle and having him surrender, but if that's happened, then the Royalist has probably played extremely poorly, or the parliamentarians have been very lucky, because he's a good general, and he's got a lot of other good generals with him, and if you put him out in danger, like, that's on you. Like, the way the map's set up and the units that he can be stacked with defensively, you know, that's less likely to happen with experienced players. I think more often than not, you're moving around the board and you're picking battles strategically, because that's the other part of this. It's not, you can't win by military conquest. You probably could, having said that, but I think that's very difficult. Your battles are such that you're trying to win to be able to put out more political influence, to kind of connect areas together, to take strategic points on the map through which you can now start to spread your ideals and your politics, basically. That's one of the really important parts of this. As an army marches, it might fight a battle, but that battle is no more important than the political influence that you've left behind in your wake as you've marched through the country. And that's something I really liked about Washington's War, and is extremely important and prevalent to playing this. And so, having played Washington's War, I knew what I was getting myself into in this game, because the story with Washington's War, when Grant and I played it, is that we played it as a war game and didn't really pay attention much to the political influence. And then at the very end, in the very last turn, we were like, how can I get some VPs? Flip, 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 flip. And it was like, we should have been doing that all game long. That's where the real game is. And so going into this one, it was like, okay, I'm gonna churn out this political influence, and I'm going to use my armies to support that and to blaze trails through which I can place more. And coming back to the local notables, those guys are static in these little kind of mini strongholds, and they can influence 2 spaces away from them. And you've got a couple of those around the board, and some of them are really well placed, some of them not so well placed. But you're bopping those every so often just to clean up behind you, or to change a key influence whilst you do some other action as well to go through that. They're a really nice little addition, little piece of chrome that I thought was excellent, and I really, really enjoyed it. So, yes, as you can tell, I had a good time with this. English Civil War is a topic that I find interesting, obviously, but I don't know. It's finding games on it that are... There's just not many, right? So I've played this War Without an Enemy, which is by Nuts Publishing, as a block war game. It's extremely good. And it's big, and it's long, and it's meaty as well, considering it's a block game. And then there's a States of Siege game called Cruel Necessity, where it's, you're the parliamentarian sat in London and everyone's just converging on you, and it is fairly miserable. But those are the 2 that I've played. So this one was designed by Charles Vasey, sorry. And he did there's a predecessor to this called The King's War. And, there's a lot of similarities in some of the things that happen, and I think he redid this game into this format, having seen We the People, and they're like, that was great. So I do have that, and at some point I'm going to play that, and maybe I'll do a video kind of comparing all of the English Civil War games I've played, but this was a very enjoyable, meaty experience. It is a CDG, so you've got a hand of cards. You're spending you're either doing the events on them, some of which are good, some of which are not good, or you're spending the operations for events. The operations value to do actions on the board, sorry. And so with those, you're activating generals who are then activating the armies there, and they're moving around the board with their movement points. Or you might use that just to place a number of political control markers out. And the political control markers are placed similar to kind of the Twilight Struggle style, where you can't put one out on another one, you can't leapfrog stuff that wasn't already there, but you can put them all out in a shell. If there's existing PC markers, you can put them adjacent to those, but I can't just put 4 in a new line going out as a tendril. So you can do that. You can purchase reinforcements, and there's some kind of rules about how and when and the order in which you place those, which I'd heard a lot of complaints about online. I did not have any troubles with those particularly. You order your reinforcements in a certain way, you have to get the little volunteers out before you get the veterans. You can only get a certain number, but that's printed on the turn track, and you can only do them, one in each area. I don't know. I didn't find I felt a lot of complaints about that, but I didn't find it that big a deal. So just don't let that scare you off, honestly. And, and it's, like all those CDGs, I'm trying to make the best out of what I've got, trying to be efficient as possible. Now, this CDG doesn't have the meanness of opposing events triggering. So if I have a bunch of, if I'm the parliamentarian and I've got a bunch of royalist cards in my hand, I just have to use the ops. I can't use the events. When I play it, the event doesn't trigger and I'll get screwed. Nothing like that. You just play the ops instead. And so what you get into, instead of it being like, oh, I play a card and bad stuff happens to me, you just don't have any cool events. You're limited to just doing actions, and the flip side of that is that if I have your cards, that means you're not playing them. And so in the very first hand of cards, I was playing the parliamentarians in this, and I had a bunch of stuff that was like, hey, put out this royalist local notable, or this royalist gets a whole bunch of stuff, or put out this new general. And so I'm playing those for the ops. Great, they don't trigger. I know that some of that stuff isn't going to happen that would be a huge boom to that player. It's not going to happen for at least another 3 hands before those kind of get shuffled back in and are likely to kind of come back up again. I thought that was... I like that way of doing it as well, because for newer players it's less punitive. I don't get my cool events because you played them, but at least you don't play a hand of cards and like, I played an action and a bad thing happened to me. I enjoy that, but I know that isn't necessarily for everyone. Some people just want to like play cards and positive things happen, or like something happens instead of like, I'm just playing these cards to reduce the amount of terrible things that happen to me. So this doesn't have that, which is, it's enjoyable. It's just a different version of CDGs as opposed to something like Labyrinth or Twilight Struggle, where that pain and that stress of hand management, it's just a different style. So what I will do is I will kind of show you how this works, and then I'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So here's a look at the map, and as you can see, this is a point-to-point movement map, and what I talked about earlier with this being based off of the We the People game, which then was redone as Washington's War. This is a game where you have some units, military units, stacks of units on the board, but you also have, as you can see from these coloured flags, all the different kind of political control on the spaces as well. So whilst this is a war game, this is also a kind of a hearts and minds style game as well. So you've got stacks of units with generals marching around, fighting each other, laying sieges, things like that. But almost more importantly is, marching through, flipping political control markers, or spending actions just to like influence those. Because that's how the game is won. This game, generally speaking, you can win by making King Charles surrender. That's usually very difficult. But the major way to win is to have control of 4 of these regions. Or if you get to the end of the game, there's kind of some victory points up there too. So you can see here you've got the north is this red region. And we've got Wales. Oh, I think they call it the West. But it's Wales. Is this orange region. We've got the Midlands in green. We got the east over here in green, purple, green, sorry, not colorblind, and then the south down here in blue. And so these are delineated, and each one of these has a different kind of scoring threshold. So to be in control of the south, there's 21 spaces, you need to control 11 of those. And from what we could tell, there was no, and I could be wrong about this, but there was no, like, that's not listed anywhere on the map or anywhere on the play aid, and the play aid is printed on the back of the rulebook on the back of the playbook. So like, not really. But again, this is an old game, and you kind of got it from 2008 at least. You got to excuse some of that stuff. In today's modern game, you'd have a million play aids, and it'd be a little bit easier. But like those victory conditions, because this takes 11, this takes 5. I think this was 9. This was 8, and then this was the Midlands was 9. or the East was 7, something like that. Like, each of these areas has a different amount that you need to control, and knowing that and being able to calculate that during the game turn is very important. And keep having to flip back to the last page of the rule is pretty annoying. But, anyway, I digress. So, that's kind of the layout of the map. There's obviously these kind of circles, which are normal spaces. These diamond rhombus shapes are for local notables, which either are on the map or will appear through events. Then there's limited fortresses, and then larger supply fortresses in the game as well. And you're going to have a hand of cards, and the hand of cards will be seeded. So there's early war cards, mid-war cards, and late war cards. And there's also some other mandatory events, core cards, and alt history that's going to get mixed in there as well. But you're going to have a hand of cards, and if you're the royalist player, you're looking for these events that are blue and say R on them. This is an event that goes for you. Or you might have a card which is just 3 operations. It's got a 3 on it, and it tells you the things that you can do with those ops. If you're the royalist player and you have a parliamentarian event, you can just discard this, and it doesn't trigger the event for the opponent. None of that in this game. Again, very Washington's War. But you don't get a lot out of this. You get 1 op point out of it, basically. So it's not a whole lot, but at least it's not a game where you're trying to mitigate the bad things that are happening to you, like Twilight Struggle or Labyrinth. Now, if you are the royalist player and you have a hand of parliamentarian events, it's both a boon because the opponent's not getting all those cool events, but it's also a burden because you only have a hand of like 4 ops or 5 ops total, because it's 1 on each card. So whilst you won't be able to do a lot out there, you're preventing your opponent, in a passive way from doing a whole bunch of bad stuff to you as well. And so the game has some tension in the cards, in the sense that you can look at your hand and you're like, wow. Almost immediately you're like, this is a bad hand. It's very easy to analyze that. You only have 6 cards in your hand, generally speaking, 2 of which are going to be your core cards, and it's, 1 or 2 ops, and you will always have these, and you'll usually have 4 additional cards. So that's something that I really enjoyed about this, is as fiddly as some of the little bits and rules could be, the core system of moving guys around, doing the markers, and your actual hand of cards. I don't have 9 cards, all of which are brand new, half of which are going to be bad for me, that I have to analyze each hand. It was very easy to just, here's my hand, really quick to analyze it, and then to get going and just start playing them, which I really enjoyed. Having never played this before, usually I'm very slow with newer games because I'm trying to work through it, trying to understand as much as possible. But this one was easy to just almost dive into it and really get going on it. Because the rules themselves, now, I have played Washington's War, and so as I was reading the rules, I'm like, oh, this is almost identical, like the core system. Again, there's a lot of chrome and different changes to it, but the core system of flipping all of these for control of provinces or regions, and then moving your stacks of armies to do combats, but also to trailblaze those PC markers, is some of the really important stuff. Being able to tie up units, pin units, whilst you do other stuff over here, is a huge part of this game. And being able to do that effectively is really where this game lies. Now, some of the complaints you can hear about this game are with regards to the fiddliness of recruiting, and how and where you can do that, and some of the other bits and pieces. After the first or second round, really wasn't that big of a deal. There's a number of phases in which you recruit, and how those might be laid out in the rulebook may not be the cleanest, but, during your recruit phase, you get a number of recruits listed on the turn track, and you can place that many, but you can only ever place 1 per recruit space, which are listed on the map. This is a recruit space, purple for the Midlands, and a blue flag for the Royalist player. Only the Royalist player can put purple units into this space, right? I think that's fairly simple. Only the Royalist player can put purple units into this space. Only the the Royalist player, before I knock everything over, only the Royalist player can put orange units into this space. Once you figure that out, it makes some sense. And you might have 3 recruits. You can only ever put 1 per region. And so you're like, or one per recruit space, I believe it is. So you could put one red one here, and then one red one here, and then a blue one down here, right? You can do that. And then there's an order in which you have to put your units. So I've got this stack of green Eastern units. I have to build these 1-level ones first. Once I've got all those out, then I can start putting my level 2 veteran ones out. But, you know, the game tells you in setup how to stack those so that it works. I didn't feel like it was that big a deal. There's also some chrome with the status of the Royal Navy. In our game, they swung very quickly to the parliamentarian side, and I was able to get some bonuses from sieging, and I also got a bonus where I could recruit these level 2 veterans. I could recruit one of those instead of going through that stack and doing all the ones first. So I was able to pull out some powerful units first. That was a huge boon, but that's done with a little chit pull every 3 turns, I believe. You just pull one of these, and it says, this says Royalist Privateers, -1. The naval status goes here, and then you look, okay, cool, we get this effect, but nothing in this effect. We were up here, so I'm getting this effect and this effect. You can just read it, and that's kind of what it says. But basically, this game is, I'm going to play some ops. Here, let me get some ops out. We're going to play 3 ops. So 3 ops can be used to activate 1 general, and the general can be either a general with a 2 rating, or a general with, let's see what else I got, with a 1 rating, or a 3 rating. Do we have any on here? I do somewhere kicking around. But basically, your big cards, the 3s, can be used to activate any general. And it's 1 general, and then you move them, and that's what you do with them. A 1 card can only be used to activate a level 1 general. The card ops have to equal or exceed the general's strategic value. So a level 3 general is a bad general. Very few cards can activate them. A level 1 general is extremely good because they have all the flexibility in the world that can be activated by any card, basically. So that's kind of what you're looking for with those. When you move, you get a certain number of movement points. The movement points that you get are based on the number of brigades in your army, and then you spend your movement points based on what road or mountain connections that you're going over, basically. So, you know, you're moving around. You can move into this space. You can move into this space. You can move into this space. And so that was 1, 2, 3 movement points. I've got 4 with this stack because they only have 3 units in them. My last movement point, because I'm in this, I can spend to flip the political control. So as you can see, having lots of small stacks, you can kind of run around and flip a bunch of guys if you've got the ops to do it. Or you might have a big kind of doom stack, which King Charles often has, and he's going around Hulk smashing other armies. So it reduces your capacity to do that, and they're very scared, and I'm running away from them. Very, very interesting. But the game is won, generally speaking, by political control. So you always have that in mind. It's very easy to get distracted into doing a bunch of combats where you're like, if this combat doesn't help you take political control or to block off areas for you to secure, then you're kind of wasting your ops in a way. The other thing you can do with ops is you can simply just place PC markers. And you can place PC markers adjacent to places you don't have them already. Or adjacent to places that you have them but are vacant. So this is vacant, I could put one here. I cannot now put one here because I did not have this at the beginning of this card. So I can put one here, I could put one in Poole because I already have one adjacent, and I can put one in Salisbury because I already have one adjacent to Newbury and Bath and all that kind of stuff. So you can just place ops, which is really nice. You kind of want to do that. Or you can activate a number of local notables. In this instance, we'd be able to do 3. And local notables were just so cool. I really, really liked them. They were such an interesting part of this game because it was not something that I believed that was in Washington's War. And the little local notables, they're regional local notables, right? And they just have influence over an area, but it's a limited area, but they can do a little bit more than just placing in open spaces. So when you activate local notables, within 0 to 2 spaces of them, they can flip or place a PC marker. And that can be extremely strong. So we've got the Earl of Derby here. if I activate him, so I've got 3 ops, I could activate this guy, I could activate, well, I can't because he's under siege, that guy, and if I had any other ones, I've got Newark over here, I can activate this guy. So, what he can do is, he can, for his, it's called raiding. He does a little raid, and he can flip this guy over here. Now, even though this is 1 to 2 spaces away, it's not in the same region. I don't believe he can do that because he's purple. So he could go here, he could go here if this was vacant, and you can't ever raid into fortresses. So he's a little bit limited. He's not actually that great, but when you're fighting between these guys, trying to get control of Wales, flipping back and forth, really, really fun and interesting to do. This guy up in Newark, he can also do one. So we're going to flip this one back here. And each of them only flips 1, but if you've got 3 ops, you're doing 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. And then you got some more ops in you. Maybe raid another time. Raid another time on a different card. And you can, instead of just kind of placing them, you can start flipping guys. And where that comes into effect is you can get political isolation. And if you can kind of cut people off, so if I can get blue here, and I could get blue here, and blue here, if I can maintain this for the whole of this round, all the way at the beginning of next round, there is this political control phase where you can kind of put one out in like a rear area, most likely. But then there's political isolation. These political control markers don't have anywhere to supply, basically, and so they're just eliminated. Like, they don't have access to their power base, you know. They don't have access to the local notables or to the kind of army, military, and their fortresses supporting them, so they just go away. So the local notables give you a much stronger capacity to manipulate things in order to take advantage of that. And, you know, you're also marching your army to try and cut those lines, to kind of remove those in big waves where possible. Just such an interesting thing. But I'm playing a card, you're playing a card, you go back and forth, and you'll flip a whole bunch of these. They're all going to change. You're going to track control of these. I had a really, really good time with this. So that's kind of how this works. What we'll do is we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So that's how the game functions. I think the only thing I didn't really talk about was combat. But combat's very simple. You just add up all the value of your guys, and then the tactical value of your leader, and then you roll a d6 and add that to it. And then it's kind of whoever's got the most wins. It's really that simple. And then if you win by a certain margin, you're starting to get into decisive victories. You can play cards that, like, you know, extra trump that and things like that. And so you're getting into real... But it's not a complicated combat system in any way. You know, if you lose, you can... You know, a bunch of guys are going to die, and then you'll have to retreat. Or you can... What's really cool is you can disperse your forces. So fewer of them die, but they just kind of go into like a holding box, and then later they come back, and you get a couple of them free on the board, rounded down, and then the rest of them go back into the pool of recruitable ones. It's a really neat little system, because the country's so small, like, you know, you would get bands of guys that would disperse if they lost, but, like, you know, they would reform as these cadres, and, you know, they would have a fighting force. It wasn't as big, but you get some of them back, and some of the little cyclical elements like that were really neat. I enjoyed that aspect of it. I had a blast playing this. I thought it was really, really interesting. Getting a hold of a copy of this, I think, is not particularly easy these days. I think it's quite highly priced on the second-hand market. There is a mounted map version if you want. I actually have it, but we use the paper map. But I hope that this comes on to reprint and gets kind of a new edition, because this was made in 2008. So the rulebook is black and white. It's not as well organized as the new versions are of GMT's games. And it's not that it's bad. Like, you can, like, we played it, it's totally fine. But, like, you could give this a little bit of a facelift. The cards are the old kind of flimsy ones. Get the nice new fancy ones that are like bricks that they make. You know, some nice grey core counters, and you're looking at a really, really nice game. But, you know, the package itself, if you can get a hold of this, I think it's well worth it, but I'm also, you know, this is a topic that I appreciate, that I enjoy. I've been to almost every place that's listed on the map, or I have some other connection to it, which was really cool. It's always nice to play war games that deal with something that, you know, you have more of a personal connection to. You know, Portsmouth is on the board. I grew up 30 minutes away from Portsmouth. You know, oh look, there's Torquay is on the board. I have been on holiday there. You know, Gloucester's on the board. That's where my mother's family's from. Shrewsbury's on the board. That's where my grandparents used to live. Used to go there all the time. Even Malvern. You know, my brother dated someone from Malvern, so I've been there. Like, just, you know, little bits and pieces like that make the name slightly more recognisable and not just like, this is a point on the map. I don't know, it helps you to know, like, it gives you just a deeper connection to the theme of the game as well. I think the gameplay itself, I enjoy. It's very engaging. I enjoy a good CDG, and this is, like, if you put this and Washington's War next to each other, they're very, very, very similar. Like, if you've played one, you know how to play the other, and then you're just looking at the different chromes in each one, basically. So I really appreciated that from this standpoint. I actually didn't know that going into this. I was like, oh, I gotta learn this new CDG, and as I was reading the rules and, like, playing it, I'm like, oh, this is Washington's War. And then I looked it up on BGG, and they're like, yeah, this is inspired by We the People, which is Washington's War. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Like, I'm not a moron. But it was kind of a revelation, and as soon as I knew that, I knew much better how to approach the game and the kind of things that I should be doing and what I'm looking for in this one. So yes, I had a very good time with this. I think they put the complexity as 7 of 9 on this. Gosh. And this is... So, I think I have a harder time judging complexity these days, because we've played just volumetrically so many different systems that I think some systems I'm like, oh, that wasn't bad, but for people who are new to the hobby, they might be like, yeah, that's kind of intense. Because the only stuff that's complicated, making sure you get, like, the exceptions or, like, the specifics of some of the rules of, like, when you recruit, this is how and where you recruit. Now, if you read the rules, it's all in there. It explains it to you. I don't think it's that complicated, but, like, it's not on a play aid. There's not a play aid that says, remember this, this, and this. There's not a play aid that has the victory schedule on it, which is a crime. Please fix that in a reprint. Please, please, please. And so, like, we had to write out our own one. And, you know, you can do that. It's no big deal, but put that in the game. But I didn't, you know, I play a card, I've got this many ops, and here's my little menu of actions, and that's what I can do with it. You know, the decision space is quite big. If you're putting out PC markers, where do you put them? How can you put them? Or do I march an army and do something with them, put out some PC markers and then do a battle? Or do I just march them really far and do a siege? You know, it's got all these chromy bits to it, but it's not... don't let it scare you off. There are other games that GMT makes that are rated a 7, which are like, yes, definitely a 7. You know, this one, it's not super mega scary. Don't let that kind of scare you off with it as well. Could you play this solo? Maybe. You just got to figure out the card system. You could probably use the Stuka Joe method. Probably. And then you start getting into, like, priorities and what you're doing with things. But the reality is CDGs are 2-player games. Get another player together, sit down with them with this. It's a topic that I think is very interesting. Again, obviously I'm biased. But if you don't know a lot about the English Civil War, you could do a lot worse than playing this game. It's got everything in it. Any CDGs are nice intros to topics because you've got these events and the names of things and stuff that happen. So you also get a little bit of, history of, like, oh, this guy was good at this, or this guy kind of was related to this type of an event that thing happened. Which, in a hex encounter game, you don't get kind of that extra little descriptor in it. So it's a nice piece of wargaming. I had a really good time with this. Anytime you play with friends and you play something new that's enjoyable, you have a good time, and that's going to reflect in how I feel about the game as well. But being familiar with the system that was in this was a real boon. It was great. We were able to pick it up, learn it fairly quickly. I didn't have my head in the rules that often after the first probably turn or two. We'd written out the victory point schedule, and I don't know, everything else is pretty clear about what you should do once you've read it. And so, if you can get a hold of this, I would recommend it. I would say that this is a good game on this topic as well. People are going to ask, oh, should I get this or should I get this war without an enemy? The answer to that is, do you like block games or do you like CDGs? That's, which one of those prefer, get that one. Because you'll enjoy that method more. Because they're both very good. They both do things differently. And, I think they're both... This War Without an Enemy might be cheaper. And if that's a concern, then do with that one. But, because you can't get this new anywhere. I think that's on a second-hand market. It's pretty expensive. But, This War Without an Enemy wasn't cheap either. It's got a nice map and it's got a ton of blocks in it. And it was an international publication. So that's a decision I'm going to leave to you. If there are any other English Civil War games that you know and would like to share, please do. Because I do... it's an interesting topic to me. I've played Cruel Necessity, and I've played This War Without an Enemy, played this now. And I have The King's War, which is, it's this old game by a company I don't even know exists anymore. And it's got this beautiful Rick Barber map, which, I'm not normally, he's not my favourite map designer, but for that one, for some reason, I think it's really cool. So, if there are any other ones that you've played that you would recommend, please let me know. I would also be interested in any English Civil War tactical games where you can play some of the pitched battles. I've got Men of Iron, but that's Wars of the Roses, and so it's not quite at this level. But I don't know. There's some similar type of styles. But if there's a tactical game that's English Civil War, maybe there is, and I'm just I'm forgetting. I don't know. But let me know. But Unhappy King Charles from GMT. I had a blast playing this. I really, really enjoyed it. It ticks a lot of boxes for me, from the theme to the CDG nature of it, to the multi-layers of play that you're doing. Great. This was right up my alley, and I'm very glad I was able to finally get this venerable title to the table. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.